welcome everybody to the third of our Pensions Dashboards webinars. My name's Simon Bonnywell. I'm the Deputy Director in Department for Work and Pensions, who oversees dashboards policy. So this is, as I said, the third in a series of 4 webinars following the publication of our consultation on the dashboards regulations on the 31st of January. A really important part of our consultation to try and give more detail and answer some questions that you may have about the dashboards consultation and the regulations. Really important that we do this and get your input as part of getting the legislative framework for dashboards right. This particular session is titled Getting Ready for Dashboards. It's focused at the industry and the requirements for schemes, administrators and software providers. I'll do a little bit of domestics about how it's all going to work, and then we'll get going with the presentation content. So first of all, just to be aware, we are recording the session, so you will be able to watch it again at your leisure. It will be put onto the Pensions Dashboard Programme website. We'll start off by running through some slides. We'll have presenters from the Department for Work and Pensions, to our policy leads, James Holland and Joe Stacey. From the Pensions Dashboard Programme, David Reed, who's the head of policy, and from the pensions regulator, Lucy Stone, who leads on their dashboards work. After we've had the presentation, there will be a question and answer session with our expert panel, which is essentially all of the presenters I've just named, plus Chris Curry, who's the principal of the Pensions Dashboard Programme, and Caroline Donaldson from the FCA. The slides, as well as the recording of the session, will be published on the Pensions Dashboard website. For the questions, please do use the sidebar. Unfortunately, with so many people attending, we can't really put you on camera and ask you to ask your question yourself. So if you put your question in the sidebar, we will do our best to collate it and put it to the panel during that session. We will probably not get through all of the questions. We are putting together a frequently asked questions document so that we'll try and pick up some of the ones that we haven't been able to answer during the course of the actual question and answer session. So please use the sidebar. I know there have been a few issues at times with people not having access to the sidebar, which is unhelpful. But if you can't access the chat, then please use email address, which is on the first slide, which we've got showing at the moment, which is pensionsdashboard@dwp.gov.uk. If you fire off a question to there, then again, we'll try and pick it up. As is kind of clear, I think, from the number of people we've got across a broad range of organisations, Dashboards is very much a collaborative project with ourselves and DWP, Pensions Regulator, the FCA, and then the Pensions Dashboard Programme. So again, if there are questions, I mean, we've got all of those people represented here today, but if for example, we can't answer one particular question, we will take that away and make sure it gets to the right person in one of those organisations. So although this webinar is very much focused on the consultation, the regulations which DWP has published, it is very much a joint project, and I'd just like to ask Chris Curry, the principal of the Pensions Dashboard Programme, just to say a few words to put this session kind of in context of the overall programme, and then we'll crack on with the slides. Chris.
Thanks very much, Simon. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to see so many of you on this call again today. Just to emphasise something that Simon said towards the end there, this is very much a collaborative project working not just across government and the regulators, but also working with the industry as well. So it's very important that we get this opportunity to talk to you and to listen to you about what it is that you think we need to be doing in order to get this very important programme and this very important project, Pensions Dashboards, up and running and ready for use in the UK. As Simon said, I'm just going to give a little bit of context. I won't take too long because I know there's a lot of content to get through today, and we want to leave as much time for questions from you as possible. But it really does seem as if we are kind of motoring along in the pensions dashboard space now. It's only a relatively short time, 2019, that the programme was formed and started to get things ready. But the last 6 to 9 months has really seen, I think, an awful lot of progress, beginning with towards the end of the last summer when we appointed Capgemini and Origo to help work on the digital architecture and the central build for pensions dashboards. and I'm pleased to say that that's already underway. We're already seeing some of that come together, and we're expecting that to be effectively completed, subject to testing and further development with the industry in the early summer this year. We've also recently appointed a digital identity provider who will help us work with consumers and individuals to identify themselves and access to the system in that particular way. And we're already starting work with that provider, DigIdentity, on the integration of that into the service as well. So there is a lot of work that is already going on. I think it's really important, Simon said, that we get your input all the way through this. We have been, I think, trying to give you as much information as we can all the way through the programme, but I think the last 2 to 3 weeks since the consultation has been published, I think has really allowed us to have these very good, very detailed and very open conversations with you all as to how this is going to work in practice, so we can help you understand what it is that you need to do, as well as hearing from you what we need to do to help you to get there. I didn't want to say too much more than that. I think there's going to be lots of detail coming your way, lots of opportunity to ask questions about exactly how you can get involved and how we can help you. But I look forward to speaking to some of you at the end of the session.
Thanks very much, Chris. Really appreciate that. Right. Without any further ado, I will hand over to James from DWP, who will start going through the slides for us. James.
Thanks, Simon. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of what the webinar is going to cover before passing over to Joe. So the focus of this webinar will be on the requirements for data providers. The consultation covers requirements for trustees and managers of occupational pension schemes, and we can explore the roles of administrators, software providers and others. There'll also be an opportunity to touch upon the consultation published last week by the FCA on rules for personal and stakeholder pension schemes in relation to dashboards. We will cover some of the same introductory material that we covered in DWP Webinar 1 and also in Webinar 2. So briefly, to outline the webinar content, we're going to cover the scope of the regulations, how dashboards will work in the digital architecture, the find and view process and effective matching, standards, oversight of those and the MAPS plans for publication, data, including return times and value requirements, connection, the staging timeline, issues for new schemes, hybrids and other considerations, the compliance and enforcement process, reporting and monitoring, and TPR's approach to driving compliance. As Simon said, there'll be one further webinar after this one, which will be at the same time on Thursday next week. And in that, we'll delve more deeply into the value data requirements, including the interaction with the Financial Reporting Council's consultation on ASTM1, which was published on Monday. Okay. So just to move on to the next slide, please, Mary. So the consultation seeks views on the proposed regulations, which will support the introduction of pensions dashboards. Pensions dashboards will be secure online platforms which will enable individuals to access information about their pensions, including their state pensions, in one place at a time of their choosing. They'll help individuals to navigate and keep track of their pensions, reconnect people with any lost pension pots, improve awareness and understanding, and help individuals to plan effectively for their retirement. So the regulations set out requirements to be met by organisations wishing to provide pensions dashboards by becoming qualifying pensions dashboard services, and that's set out in part 2 of the regulations and was explored in more detail in our second webinar last week. And the regulations also cover requirements to be met by trustees or managers of occupational pension schemes, that's part 3 of the regulations, and provisions for the pensions regulator to enforce compliance with requirements on schemes, and that's part 4 of the regulations. The regulations affect those occupational pension schemes with at least 100 relevant members, although we expect to regulate for smaller schemes in the future. A relevant member includes both active and deferred members of a pension scheme. We're not including pensioner members in this initial set of regulations, which means that pensioner member information will not be shown on dashboards, and these members will not be included when determining a scheme's size. Essentially, we're taking a phased approach, and we think that if a member is already taking benefits from a pension or a portion of it, they are likely to be better engaged and aware of what the pension is worth. So our priority for initial dashboards is to provide information on pensions, which is still in the accumulation phase. The FCA's consultation, which covers broadly comparable requirements for personal stakeholder pension schemes, was launched last week, So except where otherwise stated, the remainder of this webinar discusses proposals that apply across both DWP and FCA consultations. If you wish to respond to our consultation, then you have till the 13th of March. We intend to publish our response this summer before the parliamentary recess, and we plan to lay affirmative regulations later this year, subject to parliamentary timetable, and we hope the regulations could be approved by the autumn. The FCA's consultation closes on the 8th of April, which allows time for affected parties to respond to both consultations. The FCA will aim to finalise their rules alongside or shortly after the regulations are approved. So I'll now pass over to Joe to recap on how dashboards will work.
Thank you, James. Yeah, so as we have done before in previous webinars, we'll take a look at how dashboards will work, and but also in this session we'll go into a bit more detail on the find and view process. So an individual will start their journey by submitting a request to find their pensions information from a dashboard of their choice. So either the MAPS dashboard or a qualifying pensions dashboard service. The digital architect will verify the individual's identity and obtain their consent to complete a search and return their pensions information. At this stage, the pension finder service will take over. This does not hold any pensions data. It acts as a switchboard, sending the individual's find request to all pension schemes. For each match found, a pension scheme will return a unique identifier, a PEI, to the individual's dashboard. This does not include pensions data, but acknowledges that there is a match. Once this has been confirmed, an individual can request to view their information, and pension schemes will return data directly to the dashboard for only the individual to see, or the person to whom an individual has delegated access. Individuals will then be able to see their pensions information side by side, providing them with a potentially complete picture of their pensions. So just to go through the digital architecture components, these are the digital architecture is the group of elements that make dashboards work, and they are the components that the Money and Pension Service, through the Pensions Dashboards programme, is responsible for delivering. The Pension Finder service is a piece of technology that sends out an instruction to all pension providers to search for a user's pension. It has no direct interface with individuals to fulfill this function. It receives all its inputs from the Consent and Authorisation service, and this includes verified and self-asserted identity details, as well as the relevant consent information. The Consent and Authorisation service initiates identity authentication and manages the consents and permissions for individuals using dashboards. It will enable the individual user to give and manage delegated access to relevant permitted others, in particular regulated financial advisors with the relevant permissions, as well as MAPS guiders. When an individual asks a dashboard to find their pensions, the Consent and Authorisation service within the digital architecture will check whether that person has already verified their identity. If they have not, they will be passed to the Identity service to complete the process of verification. Importantly, before a pension scheme confirms they have found a matching pension, they will need to interact with the Consent and Authorisation service to ensure that all the appropriate consents have been given. Going clockwise around this diagram then, the Governance Register is a technical service that provides assurances that the different elements of the ecosystem, the dashboards, Identity service, Pension Finder service, and the connections to pension schemes meet the required standards to participate. It ensures that all these elements are connected to the digital architecture, which is designed to be secure and allows access to be revoked if any party is found to be operating incorrectly. It will also enable compliance monitoring through the system. And then lastly, we have the Identity service, which allows individuals to authenticate themselves so that they can access other elements of the ecosystem. It works alongside the Consent and Authorisation service to manage the initial verification of an individual's identity and authentication of individuals returning to the dashboard. It provides the verification required to assure trustees or managers of pension schemes that they are returning data to the correct person and no one else following a matching exercise. So this slide outlines the find request process from receipt of a find request to the completion of matching and through to the registration and return of a PEI. Before I get into each step, just to clarify, the regulations will require trustees or managers of occupational schemes to connect to the digital architecture so that they can receive find and view requests, receive find requests, undertake matching and register any found pensions in order to match individuals to their pensions, and receive and respond to view requests to make individuals' information available to them at the dashboard of their choosing. So looking at step 1, the individual submits the find request via their chosen dashboard. In terms of UK GDPR, neither MAPS nor qualifying dashboard services are involved in the processing of find data. Our analysis points to MAPS and qualifying dashboard services as being controllers in respect of any data processing they undertake in order to implement a find request. Step 2, the individual gives their consent to issue the find request and has their ID verified. And then in the third step, MAPS issues the find request only once an individual has given their consent to do so and had their ID verified. This ensures that the individual is in control of the use of their data. In respect of a find request, MAPS will act as an independent data controller, and MAPS's role in processing find data ends when a find request is issued. At point 4, at this point, data is sent to pension schemes, or DWP for state pension data. Schemes must process the find data to fulfill their legal duties to receive find requests and complete matching. So they are also independent controllers of the find data. In step 5, as part of the digital process, a pensions identifier, or PEI, must then be registered for any found pensions, and that is both where there are positive matches made and possible matches. Where there is a possible match, schemes must seek to resolve this. If there is no match, there is no lawful basis to retain the find data. And then lastly, step 6, once a match is made, the PEI is returned to the individual's dashboard. The registration of a PEI is a key requirement on schemes, which must be done in accordance with technical standards. A scheme's processing of PEIs is also done as an independent controller. We're going on to the next slide. This outlines the view request process from the receipt of a view request to the return of view data to an individual's dashboard. So the first step, all of the details in the previous slide have been completed. A PEI has been returned to the individual's dashboard, and now they want to view the information that they have. In the second step, pension schemes, or DWP for state pension, must be ready to receive the view request. They cannot grant access to the view data until the consent and authorization service has checked the individual's authorization. So to do this, the schemes must check the individual's access request is authorized by checking with the CNA service. And then in the third step, the view data can then be returned directly from the scheme to the individual's chosen dashboard. Pension schemes may rely on legal obligation as provided by these regulations as their lawful basis for returning view data to dashboards. Pension schemes' control over and responsibility for the view data stops when they send it in accordance with their duties to dashboards. They are not responsible for any processing by dashboards, who will be subject to their own legal restrictions over the processing of view data. And then the last step, the MAPS dashboard, or qualifying pensions dashboard service, must display the view data in accordance with design standards, and they will be independent controllers for that processing. So as we've touched on before, in order to ensure that matching is conducted effectively, pension schemes must balance their requirements under the pensions dashboard regulations with their UK GDPR requirements. And an individual's pensions data must not be returned to the wrong individual. This would breach UK GDPR. Yet, having received an individual's find data from MAPS, schemes must do all they can to identify whether they have a match within their records. So matching must be completed immediately, and the scheme may use the verified and non-verified identity attributes contained in the find data received from the Pension Finder service. We do not want schemes to set their matching criteria so tightly that they never breach UK GDPR, but equally fail to match effectively. Nor do we want schemes to send information to the wrong individual. So effective matching will only take place when schemes strike the right balance between these requirements. As the draft regulations are set out, it will be for the trustees or managers of schemes to set their own criteria for matching. The regulations also require schemes to keep a record of their matching criteria that they use and should have regard to guidance issued by the regulator or potentially the Department for Work and Pensions. In addition to this guidance, the Pensions Administration Standards Association, PASA, have published data matching conventions, which industry colleagues may find helpful. So here we come on to standards. Throughout the regulations, you will see requirements on trustees or managers of schemes and on qualifying dashboard services. These requirements include compliance with standards published by the Money and Pension Service or possibly the pensions regulator. Standards will provide further detail on how both pension schemes and qualifying pensions dashboard providers must comply with their legislative duties. They provide a greater level of technical or operational detail than would be appropriate to outline in the regulations. So compliance with standards is mandatory, and this is because failure to comply could pose a risk to the security of the dashboard ecosystem, and or because compliance is essential in ensuring that dashboards are delivered successfully and that dashboard users are provided with the right information presented in such a way to maximize understanding and minimize the potential for consumer detriment. To put it simply, we simply can't have tens of thousands of schemes and numerous organizations hosting dashboards just doing their own thing. The system simply wouldn't work. While standards are to be published by the Money and Pension Service and potentially the pensions regulator, we propose in the consultation that the Secretary of State for the DWP would have oversight powers. So this means that the regulations would require the Secretary of State to approve the first set of standards and subsequent iterations containing amendments that are more than minor technical changes. We expect that the first set of standards and subsequent standards that make changes which go beyond minor and technical and require DWP approval would be consulted on by MAPS or TPR in respect of reporting standards should they set them. I'm going to hand over to David Reed now in MAPS to take you through their plans for publication of standards.
Thanks very much, Joe. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to draw your attention to the information that we've published on the Pensions Dashboards Programme website on standards. I should say that this is all a work in progress and the things we've published are at varying degrees of maturity, but we hope it's helpful to share where we've got to in our thinking on standards that are referred to in the draft legislation. There's a couple of things there which are draft standards. There are others which where it's more a scope of what we expect a standard to cover. And I should say we're not actively seeking feedback on these at the moment. It's very welcome, of course, but we wanted to make sure you had as much detail as possible to enable you to focus on responding to DWP's and FCA's consultations right now. And I'll come on to when we expect to consult actively on these standards in a moment. So just briefly, I'm going to go through the 6 things that you'll find on that landing page on our website. First, we've got a draft approach, and this sets out our early thinking on how we'll go about setting these standards and how we'll manage change, so including what a change cycle might look like, notice periods for implementing change, version control and deprecation. We've then got the data usage guide. This is perhaps the most mature of these documents, first published in December 2020. This is an updated version of that. This is a description of all the data items that a scheme could receive with a find request in order to do their matching, and all the data items required to be provided following a view request. This isn't yet technical. Folk amongst you will notice not a data standard, but this is what we will use to create the data standard. Next, we've got technical standards. Joe mentioned this is the APIs for find and view, the UMA profile, the user managed access profile, and the format of those pensions identifiers that schemes will have to register if they find a match for a member searching for their pensions. Code of connection, service operational and security standards, and I did notice a question in the chat about time limits, and somebody said they'd seen 5 seconds somewhere. That is in the code of connection right now. I think those 5 seconds are very, very draft, and we'd really welcome some feedback on those timings, actually, because we really want to make sure we balance the user experience with the deliverability of the process. Reporting standards, this is one where it's more of a scope. Our expectation is that this will cover all of the reporting standards needed for maps and for regulators, so it'll be one requirement, and that will be via an API into the central technical architecture. And finally, design standards for dashboards. This is currently a scope document, as our user testing is ongoing to determine the contents of that. I should say the work we've been doing so far hasn't been done in isolation. We've got some working groups on the programme that some of you may be on or you may know about that have been involved with the development of these, including we've got a data working group who've been working on the data usage guide over the last few months, or the issues that we've resolved for this version, an ecosystem technical working group on the technical standards, and a usability working group, particularly looking at those design standards. And there's more information about those working groups on our website, the DWP website. Please do contact us if you'd like to get involved, and we can send you some more information about those. So that was a whistle-stop tour of what we've published on our website. If we could just go on to the next slide, we've got a bit on timetable. So obviously January, same day as DWP published their consultation, we shared this information on standards. Excuse me. Our intention is to have a full set of standards and guidance ready to share over the summer for consultation, with a view to finalising the first version of those standards to be approved by ministers at around the same time the regulations are made in the autumn. So that's our headline timetable. If anyone does have any questions or comments on the standards, as I say, we'd be very, very grateful to receive that. It'd be very welcome, but we wouldn't want to take your time away now from focusing on responding to these three active consultations that are out now. So I think I'm passing on to James to take us onward.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about data and the requirements on schemes. So I'll give a very brief overview to data as a whole on this slide before moving on to talk about value data in a little more detail. There are 2 types of data on dashboards, find data and view data. Find data is personal data, which is provided by the individual to the digital architecture and sent to schemes by the Pension Finder service, which allows trustees or managers to search their records for a match. If a match is successfully found, trustees or managers will subsequently return scheme data relevant to that individual. Information relating to an individual's identity would be used for the purpose of matching and locating pension records only. Trustees and managers will not have to use particular find data elements for matching, but they will need to decide which data to use to search their records and find savers benefits. View data is the collective term to describe administrative data, signpost data, and value data. It is data which is returned to the dashboard by pension schemes once the individual's identity has been verified and a view request has been made, either by the individual or one of their delegate. So on administrative data, this is split into 3 categories. The first is information on the pension scheme. This must be provided by all schemes to which the regulations apply and gives details about the pension scheme. Things like the name of the pension scheme, a description of the nature of the benefit, for example, whether it's a DB, DC or another type of benefit, whether the individual is an active or deferred member, the date the individual became a member of the scheme, and the individual's normal pension age. The second category of administrative data is information about the scheme's administrator to enable the individual to get in touch should they need to or wish to. Finally, the third category of administrative data is information about the employment that gave rise to the pension. This data is provided by schemes only if it is available, and they hold it routinely anyway. So this includes information about the name of the employer and the dates of employment. In the consultation, we have proposed that administrative data should be returned to dashboard users immediately, with allowances where an individual is a very new member. So moving on to signpost data. This consists of a website address that is provided to individuals where they can access, if applicable, information on member-borne costs and charges, the scheme's statement of investment principles, and the scheme's implementation statement. The FCA is proposing a signpost to the annual report of the Independent Governance Committee or Governance Advisory Arrangement, as this is the nearest comparable equivalent to a statement of investment principles for certain personal pension schemes. We propose that signpost data should be returned immediately after a request is received. Finally, value data consists of accrued and projected pensions data, which I'll explain in more detail in the next slide. Okay, so value data is the data that dashboard users are likely to be most interested in and which will be the most useful in terms of understanding the value of their pension. We've proposed a comprehensive suite of value data requirements in order to provide individuals with as much information about their pension as possible and to make dashboards the most effective they can be. Researchers highlighted that users expect to see information on projected amounts particularly, and that seeing this information is likely to increase engagement and help them understand the value of their pension better. However, our engagement with industry has highlighted the challenges that some schemes will face in providing some of these values, and we are keen to strike the right balance between delivering an ambitious and successful dashboard service for individuals, whilst acknowledging the demands placed on schemes. We hope to use this consultation to gather views and better understand the challenges that parts of the industry may face in providing these values, as well as further understanding user requirements. In most cases, the requirements we have proposed broadly mirror those already in place for statements, but we highlight areas where we have proposed to go further. So in brief, and do note that we will be going into a lot more detail in this in our final webinar next week. So in brief, the value requirements are as follows. For money purchase benefits, we would like schemes to provide an accrued pot value, which is the value of the member's benefits built up so far, expressed as a lump sum, and an annualised accrued value, which is the value of the member's benefits built up so far, expressed as an annual income. This will be calculated using a similar methodology for projected values, but based on the current accrued pot. We recognise that this is an additional requirement for money purchase schemes, but know the importance for understanding of seeing a value as an income. We're keen to receive feedback in the consultation, both from the industry and user perspective. We'd also like, but only if held, because we recognise that this is not already a requirement, a projected pot value, calculated using the appropriate elements of ASTM1, and an annualised projected value, again using the methodology set out in ASTM1. For non-money purchase benefits, the requirements differ for active and deferred members. For active members, an accrued value is required. This would be the amount payable if pensionable service were to end at the illustration date, presented as if the individual has reached normal pension age. It should be calculated in accordance with the scheme rules, assuming no increases in salary. And a projected value, which is calculated following scheme rules, assuming that the member continues in pensionable service and continues to build up benefits until normal pension age, and assuming no increase in the individual's salary. For deferred members of non-money purchase schemes, it is the deferred pension at the date of leaving, valued to the illustration date, which must include statutory revaluations on any non-guaranteed minimum pension. We're particularly keen to receive feedback on the proposed methodology for this, given that we're aware of a range of approaches currently taken to the provision of deferred values. We also set out the requirements here for active and deferred members of cash balance schemes and collective defined benefit schemes, and I'll return to those in our fourth webinar next week. So we propose that schemes may provide values from a statement produced within the last 12 months or from a calculation made in the last 12 months, given the option of providing more up-to-date values, but recognising that some may prefer to provide statement values. I'll come back to the expected return times for value data further down this presentation. So I've mentioned ASTM1 a few times so far. As many will be aware, this document provides the methodology for calculating estimated retirement illustrations for non-money purchase pensions. And our proposed regulations refer to this. The Financial Reporting Council is responsible for ASTM1, and in part reflecting the introduction of pension dashboards, they published a consultation on Monday proposing changes to ASTM1, which seek to improve the consistency of projected values, particularly when comparing across different schemes. Again, I'll cover this in more detail in webinar 4 next week. So just to continue on value data requirements and on ASTM1 to begin with. It'll not become mandatory for schemes to provide values which use ASTM1 for their calculation, that's money purchase benefits primarily, to dashboards until a statement has been produced after October 2023. So this is when updated ASTM1 methodology from the FRC should come into force. So we're proposing extended lead time on that. There are a number of exemptions that relate to money purchase schemes only, which, if applicable to the member, will mean that schemes are not required to provide projections information. Schemes may choose to provide projections anyway in cases where exemptions apply, and the exemptions do not extend to accrued pensions data, so members will still receive information about the amount of pension they have built up so far as relevant to the scheme they're in. As the slide says, the exemptions are not new and are in line with those set out in disclosure regulations. So moving on to hybrid schemes. Trustees of hybrid schemes will be subject to the same value data requirements as other occupational pension schemes. So if an individual has 2 or more separate benefits, the scheme should provide separate returns to dashboards. Our expectation is that where one benefit is calculated with reference to both money purchase and non-money purchase formulas, only the greater value should be provided. Again, we're keen to receive feedback on the way in which this policy is framed in the draft regulations. For public service pension schemes, the requirements mirror those for other non-money purchase schemes, but we've proposed additional provisions to reflect the McLeod remedy and deferred choice underpin. Data standards published by MAPS should ensure that, if necessary, more than one value from the same entitlement can be displayed. And finally, on state pension. Values will be provided by the DWP, and these will be the estimated state pension amount that the individual may get at their state pension age, based on their current national insurance record, and a forecast of their state pension at state pension age, which is essentially a projected amount. So I'm just going to move on to talk about response times. So pensions dashboards are a digital service, and we want our approach to response times to be ambitious. We want to create a service that is user-centric and have put individuals at the heart of our proposals. We recognise, though, that there is a balance to be struck between user needs and industry deliverability, and we're keen to understand from the consultation whether our proposals strike the right balance. Before getting into the detail on response times, I wanted to set out some overarching thinking. So it's very much our view that the response times proposed in these regulations are a starting point. We want to be ambitious, and in time we're keen for these proposed timings to be reduced to help improve the quality of the service provided by pensions dashboards. For money purchase schemes in particular, we'd like to move towards instantaneous responses for all requests in the future. And with this in mind, we want pension schemes to consider now how they can put in place mechanisms to facilitate the provision of data to dashboards as quickly as possible. We've outlined in the slides the proposed maximum response times for administrative and value data. The draft regulations don't prevent the return of data quicker than this, though, and where that's possible, it should be delivered. So for administrative data, we believe that for all schemes, administrative data should be returned immediately after a review request is received. This is important because we believe that the point when an individual is seeking to access their pensions information on the dashboard, they should be made immediately aware of what pensions they have. Our approach to the return of value data is one that we believe strikes the right balance between ensuring the data, that the information is up to date, whilst also ensuring that it is deliverable for schemes. We recognise that some schemes will be able to respond more quickly if they're able to provide a value from a calculation that has already been carried out. Where that is the case, we propose that value data returned to an individual should be from a value that has been generated for a benefit statement within the last 12 months, or for another purpose, but using the same methodology within the last 12 months. If such a value has already been generated, the expectation on trustees and managers of all pension schemes is that the data will be returned immediately. The implication of this is that we expect schemes to store calculations made in a format that is in accordance with data standards and which is ready to be returned immediately. There are some exceptions. We propose in our draft regulations that where a relevant value has not been calculated or provided in a benefit statement within the last 12 months, all pension schemes will have up to 3 days to return value data, except for non-money purchase schemes, which will have 10 days. This recognises the fact that some non-money purchase schemes have additional challenges in terms of the availability of data. Schemes which offer hybrid benefits, where the benefit value is calculated with reference to both money purchase and non-money purchase formulas, will also have up to 10 days. So that concludes the session on values, and I'll hand back to Joe to cover connection and staging.
Thank you, James. Yeah, so moving on to connection. Excuse me. The draft regulations include a requirement that schemes which will be grouped into cohorts based on their size and type should be required to have completed their connection to the digital architecture on or before a certain date. For most schemes, the window for connection will be a period of 1 month before the connection deadline, although the very first cohort of the largest schemes will be required to connect during the 3 months from April 2023 to the end of June 2023. MAPS will need to manage the practical job of coordinating connection for all of the relevant occupational, personal and stakeholder pensions. And this will require some flexibility on the precise day that schemes are connected, which we hope can be accommodated with a requirement in the regulations to cooperate with MAPS. As part of connection, pension schemes will need to build or secure access to find and view APIs, which we've mentioned earlier, to communicate with the digital architecture. An API acts as an intermediary, which allows two applications to talk to one another, and full technical details will be covered in the standards as set out by MAPS. Guidance will also be made available to schemes which the regulations would require schemes to have regard to when they are completing connection. After a scheme has connected to the digital architecture, they should be in a position to respond to find and view requests, as we've looked at, and when requested by individuals using a dashboard of their choice. So this means that schemes will need to be compliant with all of the standards from the point of connection onwards. We wish to encourage schemes to seek to connect to the digital architecture before the date they are required to do so. So early staging, this can help ease the logistical process of connection for both administrators and the programme, and help make dashboards a reality for the general public sooner. We expect the easiest way to do this for many schemes will be to connect via an intermediary, such as an administrator, software provider, or a new integrated service provider. And this will allow multiple schemes to connect at the same time. If a scheme wants to connect before their connection window, they will need the permission of MAPS to do this. But in most cases where an intermediary is providing the connection for multiple schemes, we expect this to be a somewhat seamless process. Schemes will not be permitted to withdraw from the digital architecture once they have completed connection, unless they come out of scope of the regulations. For example, all members become pensioner members. Therefore, completing connection early would effectively be bringing forward the scheme's date for compliance. Small schemes, i.e. those with fewer than 100 relevant members, would be permitted to connect early and bring themselves into scope of the regulations. So given the scale of the task of connecting thousands of pension schemes, we are planning a phased approach to bringing schemes on board, broken down into cohorts by their type and size. And this is known as staging. And the staging profile, setting out the sequence and the specific deadlines for each cohort to connect to the digital architecture, is set out in Schedule 2 of the draft regulations. Working with our delivery partners, we considered our priority objectives for staging in light of our key policy objectives. We felt it was important to prioritise pace and bringing on larger schemes first in order to maximise the coverage on dashboards in as short a time frame as possible. But at the same time, we needed to consider deliverability factors for the industry, the regulators, and the programme. In May last year, the Pensions Dashboards Programme published a call for input on staging, which tested this approach with industry, and we have continued to engage across our stakeholder community as these proposals have been developed into the draft regulations. By maximising coverage on dashboards, we can bring forward the point when dashboards could be launched successfully to the public. The programme referred to this as the dashboards available point. Essentially, we would want to be confident that a complete view of pensions would be available to a critical mass of individuals using the dashboard. The user research carried out so far would suggest that individuals may have a fairly low tolerance for an incomplete dashboard, although being clear about what the gaps are and when they are likely to be filled could help to mitigate that. The timing for the launch of dashboards would also be subject to thorough end-to-end testing, including to fully assure the security of the digital architecture. We are committed to making sure that state pension information is available from day one, and the department intends to participate in the programme's testing phase this year. So, looking at the staging timeline, then, this diagram offers a broad overview of our approach to staging and the sequencing and timing of the different waves. The full details for each cohort are in Schedule 2 regulations. So we're taking a three-wave approach to staging. And we are regulating initially for the first and second waves, meaning that the draft regulations would include staging deadlines for large and medium schemes only. The legislation for the third wave, which cover small and micro schemes, will be contained in a later regulations package. Schemes in scope, relevant schemes, will be staged in order according to their type and size. And size will be determined by the number of relevant members. So that's, as mentioned, the number of active and deferred members within a scheme as per the scheme year end data for the period between April 2020 and the end of March 2021. And this is what we call the reference date within the regulations. The first wave, as covered by the DWP regulations, is for large occupational schemes with 1,000 or more relevant members, and it will run from April 2023, when the connection windows begin for the first cohort, to the end of September 2024, and it will include schemes of various types sequenced in order of priority that takes into account their size and also deliverability. The first cohort, which has a deadline of the 30th of June 2023, comprises master trusts with more than 20,000 members. And as per the FCA's consultation, most FCA regulated providers in respect of personal and stakeholder pensions. Our next priority is to ensure to focus on money purchase or DC schemes used for automatic enrolment, and monthly deadlines for these schemes will run from the end of July 2023 until the end of February 2024. And large non-money purchase and other money purchase schemes, so large DB and remaining DC, will have staging deadlines running from the end of November 2023, and it is proposed that the public service pension schemes will be staged by the end of April 2024. The second wave, is focused on medium schemes, that is schemes with between 100 and 999 relevant members, and that will run from October 2024 to October 2025. The FCA has also proposed in its consultation that personal and stakeholder schemes with fewer than 1,000 pots would stage by the end of October 2024. The third and final wave then is going to be for smaller micro schemes, those with 99 or fewer relevant members, and this is expected to commence from January 2026 onwards, but will be dealt with in a separate package of regulations, so it's not in these regulations. This phased approach allows for more time to understand the pace of staging and any potential challenges, including capacity within the ISP market to service these smaller schemes. While there are over 27,000 small and micro pension schemes in the UK, they do constitute only 0.25% of the total number of memberships. As previously mentioned, schemes, including small and micros, can connect earlier than their staging deadline with the agreement of MAPS and the regulator. All in all, our proposed approach would achieve almost 99% coverage of all UK active and deferred pension memberships by the end of September 2024. So looking now into some more detailed aspects of the proposals, we recognise the need to deal with new schemes and schemes that change size following the reference date. That's the scheme year for 2020-2021. The regulations are set out such that for large and medium schemes who are in scope, with a staging deadline based on the size and type of the scheme at the reference date, that deadline remains fixed even if the scheme's type or size changes. So a scheme that was medium based on the reference date that becomes large in the following year remains in the original cohort for medium schemes, and the same applies if it was the other way around. The only exception to that is if all the scheme's members become pensioner members, in which case it falls out of scope. For occupational schemes only, new schemes emerging in the 2 years following the reference date, so for the scheme years 2021-22 and 2022-23, the staging deadline will be the latter of either 6 months from the end of the scheme year in which they came into scope, or the staging deadline for the equivalent 2020-2021 cohort. So this ensures that newer schemes do not end up with an earlier staging date than the equivalent cohort captured by the original reference date, and it allows time for preparation for the scheme, the regulator and the programme during waves 1 and 2. If a new scheme emerges in the scheme years from April 2023 onwards, the proposed staging deadline is 6 months from the end of the relevant scheme year. For hybrid schemes, the earliest connection deadline of the equivalent money purchase and non-money purchase schemes, whichever is the largest, is the connection deadline for the hybrid scheme as a whole. There is more information and examples included in the consultation for these, and we do of course seek your views on these specific proposals in your responses to the consultation. Our engagement so far, including responses to the programme's call for input last year, has suggested broad support for our phased approach to staging, and that this is in line with policy objectives. We recognise that the deliverability of the proposed staging deadlines is tied to various other requirements in the draft regulations, including those around data. In developing our proposals, we have taken into account various issues and concerns that have been raised. Our aim has been to strike a balance between deliverability concerns and our policy objective to deliver dashboards as soon as possible in a way that will meet the needs of individual users. Some of the issues and considerations raised by industry include around scheme data quality, which is integral to the success of dashboards. There are various challenges for schemes in maintaining data quality. For example, master trusts who have concerns about employer data quality issues which are not in their control, but which could impact their ability to match individuals successfully. The pensions regulator provides guidance on reviewing and improving scheme data, and we will be providing additional dashboard and will be providing additional dashboard specific guidance later this year. And as mentioned, PASA has also recently published its helpful data matching conventions. Among non-money purchase or DB schemes, concerns have been raised around providing value data due to the complexity of benefits, a lack of digitisation, as well as changes around implementing GMP equalisation. And public service pension schemes, which represent nearly 20% of all active and deferred memberships in scope for dashboards, have a challenge face with the implementation of the McLeod remedy, which is going to remove discrimination that arose as a result of the way in which new schemes were implemented. So we may need to consider what other mitigations might be needed to ensure the successful staging of public service pension schemes in line with our staging principles. In terms of applications to defer the staging deadline, so to ensure that all schemes have a reasonable chance of being able to comply with their staging duties, we have proposed a legislative mechanism that will allow for applications to the DWP Secretary of State to defer a staging deadline for up to 12 months in specific circumstances. Basically, this would be where a scheme had in good faith embarked on a programme to transition its data to a new administrator before knowing the staging deadline and connection at the time proposed, and connection at the time proposed could put members' data at risk. There are further details to this which are set out in the consultation and of course in the draft regulations. So to ensure the success of compulsory connection, we need a robust and effective enforcement regime which allows for appropriate enforcement action to be taken in the case of a failure to adhere to any of the proposed requirements, but importantly provides a significant deterrent to non-compliance. To achieve this, TPR would be able to issue notices and penalties to trustees or managers of relevant occupational pension schemes and relevant third parties, and this is set out in Part 4 of the regulations. Penalty notices may be up to £5,000 in the case of an individual or £50,000 in other cases, such as a corporate trustee. Given the large number of requests for pensions information that could take place, we want the enforcement regime to be able to reflect the scale of any potential detriment that could be caused by failure to comply with the requirements. Therefore, the regulations would allow, at TPR's discretion, for a penalty to be issued for each contravention of a requirement of the regulations. Providing TPR with the power to issue penalties on a per request basis is intended as a significant deterrent to non-compliance. All penalties would be issued at the discretion of the regulator, who will exercise its powers in a proportionate, consistent, targeted and transparent way. To note that in terms of personal and stakeholder pension schemes, the FCA will supervise and enforce against its rules in line with the powers given to it by the Financial Services and Markets Act. There are several ways it is proposed in which MAPS and the regulators will detect non-compliance and monitor the performance of schemes in relation to matching and the return of find and view data. The primary mechanism will be through the digital architecture. Where this is not possible, MAPS or the regulator will set reporting standards for trustees or managers that will require them to maintain certain records and report certain information. We anticipate that this standard setting function will be primarily fulfilled by MAPS. We've set out in the consultation the type of information that we expect schemes to report on, and this should be considered an early indication of what we expect standards may cover, but the final requirements depend on the development of the infrastructure and how much of this reporting can be automated. Some examples of what might need to be reported include the number of matches registered with maps, the number of possible matches and how quickly possible matches were resolved, how many possible matches turned into a match made, the number of view requests received and the time taken to respond to each one, and contacts received from individuals, such as queries and complaints. The regulations also make some specific requirements for reporting in relation to connection, including any connection state changes such as scheduled downtime, maintenance or a change of endpoint, systemic issues which might affect the digital architecture, for example, any cyber attacks which would need to be reported to maps, and if a pension scheme became disconnected from the digital architecture for any reason, this would also need to be reported to maps. I'm now going to hand you over to Lucy Stone from the TPR to talk about their approach to driving compliance.
Thanks very much, Joe. We recognise at the regulator that this is quite a big change for industry. There's a lot of changes required to data, systems and processes. It's a lot of work, but it's also an incredible opportunity for savers in particular, but also for the industry to tackle historical issues of data and systems. However, we do intend to bring all our experience from automatic enrolment to help you step up to the challenge. So we know that it's helpful to have very targeted communications to the regulated community, to explain the duties very clearly. And we are hoping to also be able to tell people what we think is their potential staging date, though ultimately it is for individual schemes to look at the regs and determine it for themselves. I think critically, we don't know what we don't know. This is going to throw up quite a lot of things that we did not foresee and we can't possibly foresee. And one of the things that worked really well for AE was that it was important to work really collaboratively, industry and regulator, and in this case PDP and DWP, as issues emerge so we can start problem solving. And the first step to that is responding to the consultation and kind of pulling out where you think the key issues are and how the regulations can address them. So we will be very supportive, and we have to be pragmatic in our approach to compliance and enforcement. We are bound by public law principles. We will set out our compliance enforcement policy for consultation in due course, so you'll have a chance to look at that to know what to reasonably expect. So we'll be pragmatic, we'll be supportive, but we're going to be very robust when it comes to willful non-compliance. There is no excuse not to try and do this, and therefore we will be utilising our fine where it is appropriate. I think that brings us to the end of the session. So over back to Simon for the Q&A.
Thank you, Lucy. And thank you to all of our presenters for going through all of that material. There's an awful lot there, and as we know, dashboards is a kind of a big complicated project, and that's reflected, I think, in the amount of material that we've just gone through. There have been an excellent number of questions in the sidebar, and we will seek to get through as many of those as we possibly can in the time that we have, as well as trying to then pick up some others in our FAQ document separately. So the panel, hopefully you'll be able to see on the slide pack, but as previously mentioned, we have Chris Curry, David Reed, Lucy Stone, Caroline Donovan, James Holland and Joe Stacey. So I'll do my best to try and group some of the questions that we've had and take us through kind of trying to cover lots of different areas. In particular, in relation to some of the data questions where we've had an awful lot, we will pick up some of those now, but we do have another session, our next webinar, our fourth one next week, covering some of that stuff. So I will pick up some of them, but there'll be another opportunity to cover some of those at the next session as well. The first one, there's a couple of general ones that I'd just like to pick up before we get into some of the more detailed ones. Firstly, we have a question about, or a couple of questions about the consultation period. I think I might go rogue and try and answer these myself, and others will feel free to chip in. So the question is around the length of the consultation period and whether there's any chance that it might be extended. And I think the short answer to that is unfortunately not. We did consider quite carefully about how long a period to have the consultation open for. We need to strike a balance between obviously getting your input and giving you time to look through all of this material, because it's really important that we get that input. But at the same time, we also need to move forward with our plans for dashboards in the way that Chris outlined earlier, and then essentially the timetable is quite tight for that. We also want to be able to get the legislative framework for dashboards in place as soon as we can, really, so that then you guys and others have the opportunity, the time to then make changes that you need to in advance of the staging deadline. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to add to any of that or correct me on any of that. Okay, I shall move on. The second sort of general question, we had a couple of questions around, was in relation to the dashboard's available point, the point of time in which dashboards will become kind of available to the general public as opposed to being in the beta phase. So the question's been asked, what's the latest thinking on dashboards available point, including the acceptance criteria for the dashboard available point? Chris, I don't know if you'd like to come in on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So I think as we set out, as Joe set out, I think in the presentation about the dashboard available point, we think is going to be a point at some point after we have started staging providers and go through, and at a point where we think there is likely to be enough information available for the vast majority of people using dashboards to be able to have a beneficial, positive experience from pensions dashboards. Now, there's a number of different things which will influence exactly when that will be. Obviously, the staging timeline and the details that were set out in the presentation today will be very important in determining how much and what type of information is available and when. But I think also that there's a lot of other work that we need to do, and we are still doing and have been doing for the past 12 months and will continue to do right the way throughout this process on user research and user testing to try and understand more in depth exactly what it is that individuals will be expecting to see from pensions dashboards and exactly what information that they need to get from pensions dashboards and how it can be displayed appropriately to them. So there are a number of different criteria that we as a programme and in conjunction with the other partners to the programme will be considering as we go through. So unfortunately it means at the moment I cannot tell you exactly when the dashboard available point will be, because there are so many other dependencies that are part to it, and I can't even tell you exactly when we will be able to tell you when the dashboard's available point will be, because that will depend on the results of the user testing that we're doing to making sure that what we deliver is the right thing for consumers. And I think it's worth mentioning right at the start here, because I think this is a theme that's come through a lot of the questions that are being posed in the chat as well, is that we're very aware that what we're asking the industry to do is very different from what the industry currently does and what they have always done. But what's driving pensions dashboards and driving the programme forward is consumer need and consumer requirements. And so we are very much looking at this from the point of view of what will help customers and help consumers and help savers get better outcomes. And the pensions dashboard is an important part of that. And so the dashboard's available point will depend on exactly when we think there's enough data available of the right quality and the right type that's going to help people make positive moves on their journey in their pension saving.
Thanks very much, Chris. That's a very, very thorough answer.
Can I just add one
yes,
point to that?
David.
So I agree with everything Chris has said, obviously, but I think we do. The other thing to say is we do recognise the level of interest in this and the importance to schemes of when it will be. And I think probably we can make the commitment that it won't be an overnight decision, and there will be some notice. And while I think the principles that we set out in April 2020 still hold, and they're broadly exactly what Chris has just described. I think there is some more work for us to do to try and nail with our partners some more of that down as we move forward in time. As we get more certainty about different things, we'll be able to do that, and there will be some notice given of when it's going to go live. Is all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Thanks very much, David. I shall move us on to some questions, and we'll come to some of the value questions, I think, next. So there were quite a few questions around values in relation to DB schemes. So I'm just going to start off with one of the earlier ones we had, which is, Are there any plans to develop a TM1 type approach for schemes to leverage for providing ERIs for DB schemes? If not, there is a risk that schemes will use very different assumptions, which will not provide a user of the dashboard with a good understanding of their likely income in retirement. James, I don't know if you want to come back on that and values in DB schemes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you'll see in the regulations, we've effectively set out that for those values, we'd expect schemes to follow scheme rules broadly, and presuming that the member continues in pensionable service and continues to build up the pension benefits up to normal pension age, assuming no increase in individual salary. The drafting is reasonably broad, I guess, and I think we're really keen through this consultation to sort of understand whether that drafting provides the right balance between the sort of leeway to enable schemes to deliver the values that are most appropriate to their scheme, and possibly to do what is closest to what they already might expect to do, but also provide the constraint so as to limit sort of variance. As you say, to sort of ensure that values are reasonably coherent and comparable across different schemes. So we're really keen to sort of understand whether that balance is right, whether we do need some more substantial direction on that, and to understand whether schemes actually will interpret in particularly different ways. So I think it's a really good question, and I think you'll probably hear me say a few times that this is exactly the sort of thing we're really keen to find out about in the consultation. So please do respond to it.
Absolutely, thank you, James. I'm going to try and stay with some of the questions about DB and values. So I've got a question here. How can projected values be provided where members are not expected to remain in that employment until their normal pension age? James, do you want to come in on that one as well?
Yeah, and again, I do think this is a risk. It's a risk we've absolutely discussed quite a lot as a sort of a group over the drafting of the regulations and the consultation. It's it's a risk, but we also think that what's the alternative is not showing projections at all for DB schemes possibly, and we think that those values are important. We know that from the sort of user research and testing. So we think it's important, but we also need to manage and mitigate some of that risk. And I think part of that will be by ensuring that the appropriate caveats are provided alongside those sorts of values. That's the sort of thing that we'll develop over time with the sort of user testing to ensure that people do understand those things in the right way. I don't know, David, if you want to, do you agree with that, disagree with that? But I think that's probably where I'd sit on it. So I think it is a balance. It is a known risk, but something that we're trying to mitigate.
I think that's right. I think that's why the two sets of values are really important. It's about where am I now and where might I be if I carry on if I carry on working in this role, being a member of this pension scheme, contributing to this pension scheme. And if people are going to leave employment, they might know about that, and hopefully they'll be able to take that into account when they view the information.
Thank you both. I'm going to a few more questions on values. We had a number of questions around essentially why projections of the normal pension age, why not to the scheme or individuals' target retirement age. I don't know if you'd like to come in back on one of those, James.
Yeah, I can make a start. And again, this really is an approach that's based, I think, on simplicity. We are seeking for this first phase of dashboards to provide a high-level range of information which is understandable to individuals. In the future, it's the sort of thing that you may well look to look at things like scenario planning. All those sorts of things have been mooted in the past, but this view of dashboards, I think, is one where we're seeking simplicity, and that is the decision, I think, or that's our proposed decision, should I say, that we are keen to explore. It feels like the right one, but very, very keen to understand what other people think of the consultation.
Thank you. And just whilst we're on that sort of subject, there's a question here about whether there'll be an exemption for members within 2 years of scheme retirement age, as in currently in the SMPI, statutory monetary purchase illustration regulations, as we kind of currently have set out. So I didn't want to answer that one.
Yes, I can start as well. So yeah, schemes won't be required to provide projected values to members within 2 years of retirement age, but schemes are able to provide it should they wish to do so. So I think that broadly reflects where we are with S&Ps.
Thank you. And then I think it's probably our last one on values, and we'll move us on to a different topic. But there were quite a few questions around the requirements on DB schemes, and that most DB schemes don't produce deferred member benefit statements at present. The challenges of doing it, the challenges that we're doing it within the 10-day deadline that we've set out within the regs. So it'd be good to get a perspective on that challenge.
Yeah, I can come in with it. I mean, I think we think that providing deferred values is really important. It feels like, particularly in DB, there will be substantial numbers of dashboard users who are likely to have deferred benefits. So I feel like it's an important set of values to require. We accept, though, that they are possibly values that haven't been produced as frequently as other values, and also that there are some possibly quite significant differences in how such values have been provided in the past. So different interpretations of disclosure requirements, for example. So I think that's where I think our engagement with industry has shown so far. So we've suggested an approach to that, recognizing, as I say, that there are different approaches already used, and we're really keen to sort of test that. In terms of the timings as well, that's, I think we've set out what we feel is a reasonable approach, which tries to balance, a user expectation with an industry deliverability. But again, would like to test that with the consultation.
Thanks very much. I'm going to move us on to some of the questions which were asked around sort of staging and scheme size and some of those sorts of things. So we've got one here about how do you define the equivalent 2021, it says 21 cohort versus 2022 for a scheme growing bigger than 100 members? The numbers could be changing day by day. Joe, would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah, sure. So the cohort, the staging deadline is based on either the reference date, if you have a scheme return for the scheme year 2020-2021. Otherwise, it will be based on your scheme year end return that goes to TPR. So it isn't. It's not to be. It wouldn't be driven by numbers which change on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if Lucy wanted to add anything there.
No, that's right. The correct value is your scheme year end date. Obviously, each scheme determines that it has their own scheme year end date. That is the value you need to consider annually as to whether you have come into scope of dashboards. If you weren't already in scope of dashboards, that's in 20/21 scheme year end.
And there's a couple of questions about hybrid schemes. So when will hybrid schemes be expected to stage? Question. And wouldn't it be simpler to stage hybrids simply by reference to their total actives and deferreds rather than what you are proposing in the regs? Joe, would you like to comment on those two?
So hybrids will be staged. So if you take each of your, look at the equivalent cohort for your DC section or DC, if you have DC used for AE within your DC section, then treat the entire section as DC used for AE. But look at that, or the DB section, and then whichever is the largest and has the earliest staging date is the staging date for the entire scheme. So we've developed these proposals sort of with the interest of the member in mind. We think but balancing the sort of considerations for the scheme, and so bringing forward the staging date based on the largest section, but so that the member would have, when they do get some information for that scheme, would see all the information for that scheme. But if there are alternative, simpler ways of doing this, we'd certainly welcome your views in the responses to the consultation.
Thanks very much, Joe. There's a question next, which I don't think we've covered in this Q&A before. So when do you expect we will see more of an ISP market forming? If schemes are considering using an ISP, they need to be looking at the logistics of doing so. But at the moment, there's no functioning ISP market to look at or to compare, which is an important part of a business case decision. If there is no ISP market or only a single ISP before staging date, does this cause any concerns? That's integrated service provider for those.
So I mean, I
know what that means.
I can come in, but I don't know if Chris or David want to expand, or Lucy. But I am aware that some large suppliers have announced already their intentions to provide ISP services. So I think there is an emerging market for ISP solutions, but obviously that is going to develop and mature as we go forward with the regulations and the duties begin to bite.
Anybody want to add at all to that?
Just briefly, I think yes, that's right, Joe. I think from the discussions that we're having with industry, we are expecting there to be a number of large ISP type organisations who will be coming into the market. Obviously, it's still a little bit early for them to know exactly what that would look like and what they need to do, because in the same way as the rest of the industry, they still need to understand exactly what the duties and requirements are going to be. We will be working very closely with as part of our development work and the testing work that we're doing throughout the rest of this year as we construct the ecosystem with a number of administrators and potential ISP providers, as well as a number of large providers as well. And so I think over the course of this year, we'll expect to see more and more of those plans become firmer, and more announcements being made that the providers will, or administrators will, start to act as ISPs as well.
Thanks, Chris. There's been a couple of questions about public service pension schemes, so I'll just go through those quickly. This one is about a scheme of the size of the NHS pension scheme. We clearly want to adhere to the requirements upon us for supporting the dashboard, but struggle to understand the time frame for staging and rollout is during the period when schemes will need to implement the McLeod remedy solutions, which will take significant resource. Joe, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, we are certainly trying to balance the our sort of objective to maximise coverage on dashboards and enable dashboards to be launched successfully as early as possible, with the challenges that are faced by different parts of industry. But we certainly will listen to the concerns raised by different parts of industry, including public service pension schemes, and we do recognise the McLeod is a significant challenge, and that there may be further mitigations needed in relation to public service pension schemes.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to do one more on staging, and I think we'll try and move us on. So can schemes that have already started winding up before 2022 be allowed to stage at the end of sequence of 1,000+ relevant members in September 24 and 100+ relevant members in October 25? They may have wound up by then, and that would save wastage costs. Joe and/or Lucy, would you like to comment on that one?
So I would say that we'd certainly welcome views from respondents on schemes in wind up. I think there's merit in sort of the staging profile, perhaps helping to drive that process forward, but we'd certainly be interested in hearing views on that. I don't know if Lucy, you want to say any more?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's worth considering is that schemes can spend a very long time in wind up, and therefore there is also something we need to consider around, is there detriment to savers if effectively they are taken offline as soon as the scheme takes and wind up, because it could be a number of years. So we just need to balance with the saver experience as well.
Thanks very much to both of you. Just going to pick up a couple of questions on around compliance and enforcement, as we haven't covered anything in that space. We've only got a few minutes left. The first one is there an overall cap on the amount of pensions regulator penalty that can be imposed under the multiple incident approach? Some schemes have more than 100,000 members. Lucy?
There is a cap per breach. Obviously, I'd love to have unlimited cosmic powers, but I don't. No, so there is a cap per breach, and so we have to tie it back to a breach. I'd have to say, you know, just because there's a breach, we wouldn't treat it as 100,000 breaches just because you have 100,000 members. That's not how it works. It comes back to the nature of the precise bit of legislation that you've breached. But as I said, there is a cap. And also, you know, we have to be proportionate and targeted and consistent and all those other public law things. So we also have to be reasonable. But we will be setting out more information on these things in our compliance and enforcement policy, which we'll be consulting on in 2022. So that will be our opportunity to look at our proposed approach and feedback. Thanks,
Lucy. I mean, I think this sort of links a little bit, but the next question I was going to ask is, I appreciate that the scheme the aim is for all schemes to comply and provide data within the prescribed timeframes, but inevitably there will be teething issues with some data provision. Will there be a grace period after staging where penalties will not be applied?
I think this one's probably for me as well, Simon.
Yeah.
There won't be a blanket grace period, no, but we will take into account the circumstances of individual cases and individual breaches as we become aware of it. This is what we mean by being pragmatic and working with industry to understand where the issues are and solve problems. Again, we will set out circumstances we might consider in our forthcoming compliance and enforcement policy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try, well, let's see how we get on. Maybe one or maybe two more questions. We haven't heard from Caroline at the FCA, so I'm going to go with the one for Caroline, which I'm sure she'll thank me for. Will Section 32 policies and deferred annuities and group personal pensions be regulated by FCA or pensions regulator? Caroline.
Yes, hello all, and apologies, I'm slightly hoarse, but hopefully this will come across clearly. So yeah, all of those different types of pensions you've described, they essentially fall into the definition of a personal pension scheme. So as such, the providers of those schemes will be subject to the FCA rules when it comes to connecting and supplying information to dashboards. But I think the important thing to note here is that we don't set out requirements on a kind of per pension type basis. The value calculation requirements are determined only by whether the benefits under the scheme are money purchase or non-money purchase. So that allows the flexibility of the different pension types. But in terms of which consultation do you need to consider in relation to those particular policies, it will be the FCA one. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That's really helpful. I'm going to have to end the questions there, I'm afraid, because we are just about at time. I would just like to say a big thank you to our presenters, to our panel, and very importantly, to all of you for attending and for putting in so many questions in the sidebar. I'm very sorry that we weren't able to get through more of them. As I said, we will try and pick up them in our frequently asked questions document. There will be a subsequent fourth webinar on, I think it's Thursday next week, which will particularly focus on the data elements, and some of the questions that we weren't able to get to in particular are quite focused on estimated retirement income and projections and all of that kind of stuff, and how indeed I saw some later questions from in the sidebar around kind of consumers in relation to those, which I think is a really important element. So many thanks to you all. All of the recording, as I said, and the slides will be published on the Pensions Dashboard Programme's website. Please do remember to respond to our consultation, which closes on the 13th of March. And please do give feedback to us on how this has worked for you today. So I think that's pretty much it. Thanks again for coming. Have a great weekend when it comes, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Goodbye now.